Imagine writing just one single short story.
Right.
You type it out, you send it off to a magazine, and a few weeks later you get a paycheck. And that paycheck is equivalent to over $41,000 in today's money.
Which is just an unbelievable amount of cash for one story.
It really is. Now imagine
Oh,
doing that again and again and again.
Hell yeah.
You'd be one of the most lavishly compensated writers on the entire planet. But then, and this is the crazy part, almost every week you're writing these desperate, humiliating letters to your editor, basically begging for a $50 cash advance just so you can buy groceries and pay your rent.
It is a stunning contradiction. I mean, it completely shatters that romantic image we have, you know.
The image of the peaceful literary genius.
Exactly. The great artist sitting quietly at a typewriter just making masterpieces.
Right. Because when we think of F. Scott Fitzgerald, we immediately picture the roaring 1920s.
Oh, absolutely. The flappers, the parties.
The sparkling champagne, those wild jazz bands playing late into the night. We just picture this pure, untouchable wealth.
Yeah. But underneath that glittering surface, his actual reality was a chaotic, muddy, tragic roller coaster.
It really was. It was a life defined by this massive income, but also just crushing debt.
An intense, legendary romance, but also bitter, lost love.
Yeah. And driving every single decision he made was this desperate, painful hunger to just belong to a world that always kept him at arm's length.
And that tension right there. The massive gap between the beautiful illusion he chased and the ugly reality he actually lived, that is the master key to his work.
See, you really can't separate the man from the art.
You absolutely cannot. If you want to truly understand what he was doing on the page, you have to understand the very specific heartbreak he was living through.
Which is exactly our mission on this deep dive today, especially if you are an undergraduate student tuning in, maybe studying for your literature exams, or if you're just purely curious. We are taking a massive stack of scholarly research, including Harold Bloom's critical essays, and we're going to break it all down into clear, simple words.
We're basically going to explore the engine behind the art.
Exactly. We want to tear down the facade of the Jazz Age's most famous author, explore the mechanics of his writing style, and completely unpack his masterpiece, The Great Gatsby.
It's going to be a fascinating journey because his own life is, in many ways, the rough draft for everything he ever wrote.
So let's start at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
The man behind the myth. To understand the obsession with wealth in his books, we have to look at where he started.
Right.
Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald was born in 1896 in St. Paul, Minnesota.
And that geography is actually the first crucial piece of the puzzle here.
How so?
Well, St. Paul, Minnesota is in the American Midwest. And in the cultural hierarchy of the United States, especially back then, the Midwest was considered the heartland.
So, like, very normal, everyday people.
Exactly. It was associated with solid, hardworking, middle-class values. It was very respectable, but it was absolutely not the flashy, aristocratic, old money world of the East Coast.
Right. It was a million miles away from the massive mansions of New York.
Wow.
But his parents had a little bit of social ambition. And by 1913, Fitzgerald actually manages to get into Princeton University.
Yeah. And Princeton is one of the elite Ivy League schools.
So it's one of the most prestigious, exclusive institutions in the world.
And stepping onto that campus was a profound culture shock for him.
I can imagine.
I mean, imagine this young, ambitious, middle-class boy from the Midwest suddenly dropped into a world where his classmates are the heirs to massive generational fortunes.
Right. He's sitting next to the sons of steel tycoons and banking magnates.
Railroad barons. People whose families basically own the country.
He must have felt like a complete alien.
He did. He was acutely aware of what he didn't have. At Princeton, there were these very exclusive private eating clubs.
Like elite fraternities.
Essentially, yeah. And membership in these clubs was entirely dictated by your family's social standing and wealth.
Oh.
So Fitzgerald saw very clearly that no matter how smart he was or how charming he tried to be, there was an invisible, impenetrable wall of money separating him from the highest levels of that society.
That invisible wall.
Yeah.
That is going to haunt him for the rest of his life.
It really is.
And it probably didn't help that he struggled academically, right? I mean, he was smart, but he was constantly distracted.
Yeah, he ended up dropping out of Princeton in 1917 without ever getting his degree.
And then he joins the United States Army as a second lieutenant.
Right.
And while he's stationed at a military base near Montgomery, Alabama, the true catalyst of his entire life happens. He meets a young woman named Zelda Sayre.
Zelda was an absolute force of nature.
She was the daughter of a prominent local judge, right?
Yes, she was what they called a Southern belle. She was incredibly popular, beautiful, daring, and just highly sought after by all the young officers.
So she basically represented everything glamorous and exciting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Fitzgerald fell completely hopelessly in love with her.
But love isn't always enough. He wanted to marry her. He actually proposed.
He did.
But Zelda, or at least her family and her own practical sense of the world, put up a major roadblock. She wouldn't marry him right away.
And the reason was incredibly simple and incredibly painful.
He didn't have enough money.
Right. She essentially looked at him, a young lieutenant who was a college dropout with no clear career path, and said, "You lack the financial prospects to give me the lifestyle I require."
Ouch. That is a staggering rejection.
It was. It validated every single insecurity he had ever felt back at Princeton. It proved to him that love and ambition were totally useless without cash.
Basically, if you don't have the money, you don't get the girl. You are completely shut out of the dream.
Exactly.
You know, when you lay the story out like that, it sounds exactly like the plot of a classic cinema blockbuster.
It really does.
Like, you see this trope all the time, especially in classic Bollywood films or big romantic dramas. You have the ambitious but poor young man. He falls deeply in love with the beautiful girl who comes from a higher social class. But the family, or the girl herself, says, "You are not wealthy enough for us. You have no status." So what does the hero do? He packs his bags, leaves town, goes to the big city, and vows to make his fortune just to prove his worth and win her back.
It is the ultimate romantic archetype. And the incredible thing here is that Fitzgerald actually lived it.
He actually executed that exact script.
He did. After he left the army, he was deeply depressed over Zelda's rejection, so he moved to the biggest city of them all, New York.
He knew he had to make it big, so he takes a job in an advertising agency. He's writing slogans for streetcar signs, making a very meager salary.
Yeah, just trying desperately to save enough money to convince Zelda to take him back.
But advertising wasn't going to make him a millionaire overnight.
No, definitely not.
So in his tiny, cheap apartment, he works furiously on a novel.
He was just pouring all of his anxiety, his romantic longing, and his observations about this new, rebellious, younger generation into a manuscript.
Then it pays off. In 1920, he publishes his first novel, This Side of Paradise.
And it wasn't just a mild success, it was an absolute sensation.
It sold out of bookstores almost instantly, right?
Oh, yeah. It perfectly captured the wild, rebellious energy of the youth coming out of World War I.
So practically overnight, Fitzgerald transforms from a broke, rejected advertising copywriter into a rich, famous literary celebrity.
He achieved the impossible. He proved his worth.
And here is the wildest detail of all. Just 1 week, 7 days after This Side of Paradise was published and those massive royalty checks were guaranteed, he and Zelda were married in New York City.
The movie plot worked.
It really did. He got the money, so he got the girl.
But you know, this is where the scholarly analysis becomes so important for our listeners. Because winning the girl didn't magically erase his deep-seated insecurities.
Really, even after he got rich.
Yeah. The sources we are looking at, particularly the critical essays, emphasize that Fitzgerald always wrote from a middle-class point of view.
So even when he was rich and famous, he never lost that perspective.
Exactly. He never felt like he was truly old money. He was the perpetual outsider looking in.
Like he didn't quite belong.
Right. Harold Bloom and other critics note that Fitzgerald's unique genius came from this exact position. He was the man standing out in the cold, pressing his nose against the glass of the grand ballroom window.
That's a great image.
Yeah. He could see the beautiful people inside, dancing in the warm light, wearing the beautiful clothes. And he desired that world with a burning intensity.
And yet, when his success finally bought him a ticket into that ballroom, when he was finally standing on the dance floor with them, he still felt like a total imposter.
That is the tragedy. The realization that money can buy the tuxedo and it can buy the house, but it cannot buy you true belonging.
Wow.
That specific emotional cocktail, the intense desire for wealth, the romantic awe of the upper class, mixed with the painful, cynical realization that the rich are often shallow and cruel, that became the absolute heartbeat of his fiction.
So he gets the girl by making a fortune off a novel, but keeping the girl and keeping up that glamorous lifestyle created a completely different nightmare.
It absolutely did.
Let's talk about the financial reality of that marriage and how it shaped his career. Just to orient ourselves, let's briefly look at the timeline of his major work so we have a clear picture.
Having the chronology is very helpful.
Okay.
So, as we mentioned, this side of paradise makes him famous in 1920.
Right.
He follows that up in 1922 with his second novel, The Beautiful and Damned, which was also very successful.
Okay.
Then, in 1925, he publishes the book we will be discussing deeply today, The Great Gatsby.
His masterpiece.
Exactly. Later in life, in 1934, he publishes Tender is the Night, and he leaves behind an unfinished novel, The Last Tycoon, published in 1941 after his death.
So those are the heavy-hitting novels. But alongside those, he was an incredibly prolific writer of short stories.
He really was.
He published hundreds of them in the major high-paying magazines of the era, like the Saturday Evening Post.
He put out famous collections like Flappers and Philosophers and Tales of the Jazz Age.
And this is where the money comes in, because the numbers detailed in the sources are absolutely staggering.
The compensation he received is almost hard to comprehend in today's publishing market. The major magazines were in a bidding war for his name because his name sold copies.
Right.
So they were paying him between $1,000 and $4,000 for a single short story.
Now, $4,000 today is a nice sum of money, but we have to remember the context of the 1920s.
Well, absolutely.
We ran the numbers on inflation. A $4,000 paycheck in 1925 is equivalent to over $41,000 in today's currency.
For one story. And he could write a story in a couple of weeks if he pushed himself. He was generating an astonishing amount of liquid wealth.
Over $41,000 for a few weeks of work.
Yeah.
If you do that even 10 times a year, you are making incredible money. So the logical conclusion is that Fitzgerald was wealthy, comfortable, and financially secure.
Logically, yes. In reality, absolutely not.
Wait,
Really. The deeper we dive into his biographical records and his correspondence, the more we see a man drowning in debt. Despite all of this incredible wealth pouring into his bank account, he was constantly, desperately broke.
How does that even happen? How do you make that much money and constantly find yourself broke?
It comes down to a fatal combination of social ambition and a total lack of financial discipline.
Okay.
He and Zelda were determined to live up to the image of the glamorous, wealthy character he wrote about. They weren't just attending the party, they had to be the party.
They were basically living the brand.
Completely. They threw enormous, lavish parties that lasted for days. They stayed in the most expensive suites at the Plaza Hotel in New York.
Wow.
They traveled to the French Riviera. They bought luxury cars. They tipped waiters with $100 bills just to show off.
That is just reckless.
And tragically, Fitzgerald developed a very severe problem with alcohol, which only fueled the reckless spending. They were trying to maintain an aristocratic lifestyle on a freelancer's unpredictable income.
And the research shows just how bad it got. We read excerpts from his letters to his literary editor, a very famous man named Maxwell Perkins, and his literary agent.
Yeah, those letters are heartbreaking.
They really are. This incredibly famous, highly paid author is writing letters begging for an advance of $50 or $100 just to pay the butcher and keep the lights on. He was living paycheck to paycheck, but his paychecks were massive.
The anxiety of that lifestyle was just crushing him. He was the highest paid magazine writer in America, yet he was constantly terrified of bankruptcy.
But I have to ask the obvious question here.
Sure.
If he was making the equivalent of $41,000 for a short story, and he was so desperate for cash, why did he even bother writing novels?
That is a very good question.
Novels take years to write. They are exhausting. If I were in his shoes and I had those debts, I would just sit down, write a short story every 2 weeks, collect the massive checks, pay off all my debts, and relax. Why agonize over a novel?
That question cuts to the very core of his identity as an artist, and it reveals the central tragedy of his professional life. You see, Fitzgerald actually hated writing those highly paid short stories.
Wait, he hated the thing that made him rich?
He deeply resented it. In his private letters, he referred to those commercial short stories as hack work.
Hack work.
Yes. To understand why, you have to understand the literary hierarchy of the 1920s. Writing entertaining romantic stories for popular magazines was seen as commercial entertainment. It was disposable.
Ah, I see.
But Fitzgerald desperately wanted to be taken seriously as a profound literary artist. He wanted to sit at the same table as the greats of history. And in the culture of that time, the only way to achieve true artistic immortality was to write a great, enduring novel.
So the novel was the true test of a writer's soul.
Exactly. So, in his mind, the massive amounts of money he made from the short stories were supposed to be just a tool.
A means to an end.
Right. His logic was, I will write a commercial story, make a fortune, and that money will buy me 6 months of free time and peace of mind. And in those 6 months, I will sit quietly and write my great novel.
But because he spent the money as fast as it came in, he never actually got the 6 months of peace.
Never. He would write a story, get the massive check, spend it immediately on a wild party or a trip to Europe, go back into debt, and then panic.
Oh, what a nightmare.
To pay off the debt, he would have to immediately stop working on his novel and rush to write another commercial story that he hated just to survive. He built a golden cage for himself, and he locked himself inside it.
That is a brutally painful cycle. You're constantly sacrificing your true art to pay for the illusion of wealth.
Which is why the fact that he managed to write The Great Gatsby at all is nothing short of a miracle.
That's so true.
He wrote what is widely considered the great American novel while constantly interrupting himself to write magazine fiction to pay off his creditors.
So let's dive directly into that miracle. Let's look at the book itself. For a student studying literature, The Great Gatsby is absolutely unavoidable.
It really is.
It is arguably the ultimate American story. So let's lay out the bones of the narrative in simple terms. Who are these people and what exactly happens?
The core of the plot, underneath all the beautiful writing, is actually quite simple.
Okay.
We start with a young man named James Gatz. Jimmy Zatz. He is a very poor boy from a struggling farming family in North Dakota in the American Midwest.
And just like Fitzgerald himself, this poor boy falls deeply, obsessively in love with a wealthy girl.
Her name is Daisy. They meet when he is a young military officer wearing a uniform that hides his poverty.
But Jimmy Gatz knows the harsh reality. He knows he cannot marry Daisy. She is accustomed to immense wealth, to grand houses and absolute security.
Right, she belongs to an entirely different social class.
So he leaves her.
But he leaves with a singular burning obsession. He is going to make his fortune no matter what it takes, and he is going to become worthy of her.
So he decides to change his whole life.
Yes. To symbolize this total reinvention, he sheds his old identity. He drops the poor, ordinary name Jimmy Gatz and creates a new, glamorous, sophisticated persona.
Jay Gatsby.
Exactly, Jay Gatsby.
And he succeeds, right. He becomes incredibly, unimaginably wealthy. But he doesn't do it by working in a bank or inventing a new product. He gets rich through the dark underbelly of the 1920s economy.
Yeah, the sources point out that his wealth comes from illegal means, primarily bootlegging.
Let's explain that term for our listeners.
Right, the context of prohibition is essential here. In the 1920s, the sale of alcohol was illegal in the United States.
You couldn't buy or sell it anywhere illegally.
Exactly. And this created a massive, highly profitable black market controlled by organized crime. Gatsby gets involved with gangsters and makes a fortune selling illegal liquor and running illegal gambling operations.
So he achieves the massive wealth, but the foundation of it is entirely corrupt.
Right.
But he takes this illegal, dirty money and he uses it to build a fairy tale. He buys a ridiculous, massive mansion on Long Island, right across the bay from where Daisy lives.
And every single weekend throughout the summer, he throws these impossibly huge, lavish parties.
These parties are legendary in the book. Hundreds of people from the city drive out to his mansion. There are massive orchestras playing jazz, endless tables of food, rivers of illegal champagne.
People who are not even invited just show up, drink his alcohol, dance in his gardens, and swim in his pool.
But the twist is that Gatsby himself doesn't really care about the party.
Not at all.
He doesn't drink. He stands back in the shadows just watching the crowd. Why is he spending thousands of dollars to entertain strangers?
He is throwing these parties for one single heartbreaking reason. It is all a trap for one butterfly.
I love how you put that.
He is simply hoping that one night, the rumors of these incredible parties will reach Daisy, and she will wander into his house out of curiosity. He has spent years changing his name, breaking the law, buying the mansion, and hosting the world just for the chance to see her face again.
But there is a massive obstacle standing in his way. During the years Gatsby was away making his illegal fortune, Daisy didn't just sit and wait for him.
No, she didn't. She married a man named Tom Buchanan.
And Tom Buchanan is the absolute embodiment of everything Gatsby is not. Tom is incredibly, almost aggressively wealthy. But his wealth isn't new. He comes from a massively powerful, generational family.
Furthermore, Tom is physically intimidating, arrogant, racist, and deeply cruel.
So that is the powder keg of the novel.
Yeah.
And this setup brings us to the central theme that critics like Harold Bloom emphasize constantly, the American dream.
Yes.
We hear that phrase all the time, but let's break down exactly how it functions in this novel. What is the traditional American dream?
The traditional American dream is a foundational philosophy of the country. It's a deeply held belief that the circumstances of your birth do not dictate your destiny.
Okay, so it doesn't matter where you start?
Exactly. It is the promise that anyone, absolutely anyone, no matter how poor or disadvantaged, can achieve greatness, success, and wealth if they simply apply hard work, honesty, and determination.
The critical research often links this to the Horatio Alger myth.
Right.
Let's explain that. Horatio Alger was a 19th century author who wrote wildly popular books for young boys. And the plots were always identical. A poor, ragged street boy works very hard, stays honest, helps an old man cross the street, and eventually gets a good job, becomes rich, and achieves success.
It is the classic wholesome rags to riches story. It taught generations that hard work and morality equal wealth.
But what Fitzgerald does in this novel is deeply subversive, right?
Very much so. He takes that wholesome Horatio Alger myth and shows us its dark, mutated reality in the 20th century.
Right.
Fitzgerald argues that the pure, innocent dream of building a good life through hard work has been corrupted by a frantic, soulless greed.
Because Gatsby achieves the wealth, sure, he goes from rags to riches. But to do it, he has to become a criminal.
Exactly. The morality has been stripped away. The dream is no longer about hard work. It is about getting rich quickly, by any means necessary, just to buy status.
And even worse, Fitzgerald shows that even when you get the money, the dream is still a lie because of the class system.
Yes, this brings us to a huge, inescapable concept in the book, the brutal difference between new money and old money.
This is the invisible wall Gatsby keeps crashing his head against. Let's really unpack this class divide for our listeners because it dictates every single interaction in the novel. Gatsby is the poster child for new money.
Exactly. New money means exactly what it sounds like, wealth that was earned recently within the person's own lifetime.
Right, because Gatsby grew up poor. He was Jimmy Gatz.
So when he suddenly gets millions of dollars, he has absolutely no idea how a proper rich person is supposed to behave. He doesn't know the unwritten rules, the subtle codes of the elite.
So how does he act?
He overcompensates. He buys things that are too flashy, too bright, too big. He wears suits that are a little too colorful. He throws parties that are too loud.
He's trying too hard.
Exactly. He is trying so desperately to prove to everyone that he is rich. And in doing so, he reveals that he doesn't really know how to be wealthy. It is a performance.
Right. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Tom and Daisy Buchanan. They represent old money.
Old money is generational wealth. Tom and Daisy were born into money. Their parents were rich. Their grandparents were rich.
And he grew up in massive estates.
They went to the right private schools. They don't ever need to show off or wear flashy clothes because their wealth is simply a fact of nature, like gravity.
They possess a certain refined, subtle arrogance.
Yes, they inherently know they belong at the absolute top of the social ladder, and they look down on anyone who tries to climb up and join them.
The sources highlight some brilliant textual examples that perfectly illustrate this divide. Let's look at one of the most famous quotes in all of literature.
Okay.
When Gatsby is trying to describe the magical quality of Daisy, he says that she has a voice full of money.
It's such an amazing line.
Think about how strange and poetic that is. A voice full of money. What is Fitzgerald conveying there?
It is a devastatingly perfect description. When Gatsby says her voice is full of money, he means that her wealth is not just in her bank account, it is ingrained into her very biology.
Wow.
You can literally hear the security of generation upon generation of wealth in the way she speaks. She doesn't speak with anxiety or fear. She speaks with the casual elegance, the careless confidence of someone who has never, for a single second in her life, worried about a bill.
It sounds like a silver coin dropping onto a silver plate.
It is an intrinsic quality that Gatsby can admire, but he can never, ever imitate because he was not born with it.
And then contrast the subtle perfection of her voice with Gatsby's car. The car is the ultimate symbol of his new money desperation.
Oh, absolutely.
Fitzgerald describes Gatsby's car as this massive custom-built machine. It is a flashy, bright, rich cream color, covered in shiny nickel and a labyrinth of windshields. It is designed to be looked at.
And Tom Buchanan, the old money aristocrat, takes one look at this incredibly expensive machine and he sneers and calls it a circus wagon.
A circus wagon. That insult is a weapon of class warfare.
By calling it a circus wagon, Tom is instantly cutting Gatsby down to size. He is saying, I see exactly what you are doing. You might have millions of dollars, but you have absolutely no class.
You are not one of us.
Right. You are a clown putting on a tacky show to get our attention. Tom uses his ingrained old money status to completely dismiss all of Gatsby's new money effort in just 2 words.
Reading through Bloom's essays on this, I was struck by how the tragedy isn't just that Gatsby loses in the end. The deeper, more painful tragedy is something psychological.
Yes, the true tragedy of the novel is Gatsby's total blindness. Gatsby never realizes the truth of the system he is trying to conquer.
Because he genuinely believes in the dream.
He truly, deeply believes that the American dream is a math equation. He thinks if I just get enough millions, and if my house is big enough and my parties are grand enough, I can literally buy my way into Tom and Daisy's world. He thinks money erases history.
But the old money world doesn't operate like that.
Not at all. The old money world is an exclusive, closed club. You are either born inside it or you are forever outside it.
So no matter what he does.
No matter how many millions Gatsby makes from his illegal businesses, Tom and Daisy will always look at him and see Jimmy Gatz, the poor, uneducated farm boy, wearing a nice suit.
That is just brutal.
They will drink his alcohol, they will attend his parties, but they will never accept him as an equal. He can never truly belong.
As we said earlier, he pressed his nose against the glass, he finally broke the glass and stepped into the ballroom, but they all still treated him like he was standing outside in the cold.
And that breaks him.
So how does an author actually construct a story that complex? Let's move beyond the plot and look at the mechanics of Fitzgerald's writing craft. Our critical sources pose an interesting debate. When we read Fitzgerald, was he a magician naturally casting spells, or was he a hard-working craftsman sweating over every word?
It is a common misconception, probably fueled by his own glamorous lifestyle, that Fitzgerald just drank champagne, sat down at a typewriter, and let genius flow out of his fingers effortlessly.
Because the prose is so smooth and beautiful that it feels like magic.
Right. But the textual evidence, the actual surviving drafts and letters, proves unequivocally that he was an agonizingly hard-working craftsman.
He worked incredibly hard to make it look easy.
Precisely. He revised obsessively. The original draft of the novel, which he actually wanted to call Trimalchio in West Egg, was much messier.
Trimalchio in West Egg. I'm glad he changed the title.
Yeah, much less catchy. He cut, he rearranged, he agonized over the exact placement of single words and the rhythm of specific sentences. He was deeply concerned with the architectural structure of the novel.
And one of the key terms literary critics use to describe his unique style is the composite style. I want to break this down for our listeners because it explains why reading this book feels so unique.
Well, composite simply means something that is constructed from different, often opposing parts.
Yeah.
The critics explain that Fitzgerald's genius lay in mixing 2 radically different types of writing together, sometimes within the exact same sentence.
How does he do that?
On one hand, he writes these incredibly beautiful, poetic, almost dreamy, romantic descriptions. But on the other hand, he immediately crashes those poetic descriptions into hard, ugly, cynical, realistic facts.
He takes the beautiful and the ugly and he smashes them together.
Exactly. It creates a completely unique, vibrating tension on the page.
Let me pull an illustrative example directly from the text to show exactly how this works in practice. There is a famous scene describing one of Gatsby's wild, drunken parties. The narrator is observing the orchestra playing, and he describes the band playing yellow cocktail music.
Let's just pause and admire that phrase. Yellow cocktail music. It is a profound piece of poetic synesthesia.
Because music doesn't literally have a color.
Right. But by calling it yellow, Fitzgerald instantly evokes an entire atmosphere. Yellow evokes the warmth of a summer evening, the gold of expensive champagne bubbles. The glow of the party lights a hazy, happy, intoxicating atmosphere. It is pure, elevated poetry.
It really makes you want to be there.
But immediately after setting up that beautiful, golden, poetic atmosphere, Fitzgerald pivots. He uses the composite style to show us the ugly reality underneath the music.
What happens next?
In the very next breath, he describes the actual people at the party. And they're not elegant or beautiful. The drunk guests are behaving terribly. Women are tearing each other's dresses in petty fights.
Wow.
Men are arguing foolishly. People are vomiting. Couples are crying. It is shallow, chaotic, and completely lacking in dignity.
So that is the composite style in action. He builds the beautiful illusion of the party, the yellow music, and then aggressively undercuts it with the hard, ugly reality of the human beings attending it.
And this isn't just a stylistic trick. It perfectly mirrors the central theme of the entire book.
How so?
The beautiful, glamorous surface of the American dream is hiding a shallow, corrupt, and ugly interior. The style is the substance.
That is brilliant. Okay,
Yeah.
now we have to talk about the narrator. Because in literature, how a story is told is often just as important as what happens in the story. And the structure of this novel hinges entirely on who is speaking to us, who tells the story of Jay Gatsby.
The story is told from the first-person perspective of a character named Nick Carraway.
Right.
Nick is a young man from the Midwest. He works in the bond business in New York. And crucially, he has a foot in both worlds.
He's the bridge.
Exactly. He's Daisy's second cousin, so he has access to the old money world of the Buchanans. But he also happens to rent a small, modest house right next door to Gatsby's massive mansion, so he is pulled into the new money world as well.
But here is a structural question that I think anyone studying this book would ask. If the novel is called The Great Gatsby, and it's all about Gatsby's massive ambition and tragedy, why not just let Gatsby tell his own story?
Right.
Or if you want to be traditional, why didn't Fitzgerald just use an omniscient, invisible, third-person narrator who can see into everyone's thoughts? Why go through the trouble of inventing Nick Carraway?
That is a fundamental question of literary architecture. The sources reveal that Fitzgerald adopted this specific narrative technique after studying the works of the British author Joseph Conrad.
Like Heart of Darkness.
Exactly. Books like Heart of Darkness, which uses the narrator named Marlowe to tell the story of another man, Kurtz.
So what is the mechanical advantage of using a middleman like Nick?
Think about what Nick actually does in the story. He acts as a lightning rod.
I love that analogy. A lightning rod, like the metal pole you put on top of a tall building. When the massive, chaotic energy of a thunderstorm hits, the rod catches the lightning and safely grounds the electricity, protecting the entire structure from burning down.
Precisely. In the novel, Nick acts as the lightning rod for judgment and revelation. First of all, think about Gatsby. If Gatsby told his own story in the first person, what would he sound like?
Probably not great.
He would sound like a bragging, delusional criminal. Or worse, he would sound like a pathetic, obsessive stalker chasing a married woman.
Yeah, the magic would be completely gone.
The magic would be completely destroyed. By forcing the reader to only see Gatsby through Nick's eyes, Gatsby remains distant, aloof, and mysterious. We only get glimpses of him.
Because Nick is fascinated by him.
Right, and because Nick is fascinated, the reader becomes fascinated. Nick's perspective builds the myth of Gatsby.
And how does Nick act as a lightning rod for the author himself?
This is perhaps his most important function. Fitzgerald wanted to write a harsh critique of the wealthy class. He wanted to show how terrible Tom, Daisy, and their friends were. But if Fitzgerald used an invisible third-person narrator to constantly point out how shallow and cruel everyone is, the book would feel like a moralizing lecture. The reader would feel like the author is standing on a soapbox, preaching at them.
And nobody likes being preached at in a novel.
Exactly. But because Nick is a character in the story, a character who explicitly tells us in the first chapter that he tries to reserve all judgments we trust him.
Ah, I see.
When Nick finally gets disgusted by the behavior of the rich, we feel that disgust naturally, organically. Nick absorbs the shock of the moral decay so that the reader can experience it without feeling lectured. Nick is the essential filter that makes the entire mechanism work.
And speaking of filters, that leads us directly into the deepest, most philosophical themes of the book. Let's move into the thematic core illusion, time, and the tragedy of carelessness.
Yes, these are crucial.
The critical essays demand that we delve heavily into the concepts of time and illusion. Let's start with time. Every character seems to have a different relationship with time, but Gatsby's is the most extreme. What is his philosophy regarding time?
So Gatsby operates under a deeply flawed, almost childlike misunderstanding of how time works. He truly, genuinely believes that he can repeat the past.
He actually thinks he can go backwards.
Yes. When Nick tries to gently tell him that you can't repeat the past, Gatsby is genuinely shocked and replies, "Can't repeat the past." Why, of course you can.
He basically wants a time machine. He doesn't just want to start dating Daisy again from the present day.
No, that wouldn't be enough for him. Gatsby wants to completely obliterate the 5 years that have passed since they first met in Louisville.
He wants to erase history.
Exactly. He wants Daisy to go to Tom, tell him she never loved him, completely erase the marriage, erase the fact that she has a child with Tom, and rewind the clock to the exact moment they first kissed. He wants to freeze time in a perfect romantic past.
Which is logically and physically impossible. You cannot unring a bell. You cannot undo history.
But Gatsby's entire empire, his entire identity, is built on the absolute conviction that he can. And this psychological obsession brings up a very dense academic phrase used frequently in the Harold Bloom critiques.
Right.
The critics referred to Gatsby's Platonic conception of himself.
Okay, let's break that down because Platonic conception sounds intimidating, especially for students, but the actual idea is fascinating and crucial for understanding the novel.
It sounds like heady philosophy, but it is actually a very relatable concept. It references the ancient Greek philosopher Plato.
Without getting bogged down in an entire philosophy lecture, what does that mean here?
Well, Plato essentially argued that the physical things we see and touch in the real world are just flawed, imperfect shadows of a perfect, ideal world that exists only in the realm of ideas. The real world is messy. The ideal world is perfect.
Okay, so how does a Greek philosopher explain a bootlegger in the 1920s?
When Fitzgerald writes that Gatsby had a Platonic conception of himself, he means that Jimmy Gatz, the poor farm boy, rejected his messy, real-world reality. Instead, he retreated into his own mind and created an idealized, perfect, flawless, imaginary version of who he wanted to be.
He invented Jay Gatsby, a perfect hero.
Exactly. But the tragic flaw is that he didn't just do this to himself. He did it to Daisy, too.
Oh, so he fell in love with an idea.
Yes. Over those 5 years apart, he spent every single day imagining her. He added layer upon layer of perfection to his memory of her. He isn't actually in love with the real, breathing, human, flawed woman named Daisy Buchanan who sits in front of him.
He is deeply, obsessively in love with his own imaginary, perfect creation of her.
You got it.
You know, the best analogy I can think of for this concept, something that happens to us every day, is social media.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Think about how we interact with apps today. Imagine you are scrolling through a profile of someone you admire, but their profile is heavily edited. They use intense filters to smooth their skin. The lighting is professionally curated. They only post highlight reels from glamorous vacations, and they only show their happiest moments.
It is a highly curated, artificial illusion.
Right. Now imagine you become obsessed with that profile. You fall deeply in love with that filtered image. You think about it for years, but then one day you finally meet that person in real life.
And what happens?
You realize they're just a normal, messy, ordinary human being. They wake up with messy hair, they get annoyed, they make bad jokes, they have flaws. The shock is that the real, living person can never, ever live up to the impossible perfection of the heavily filtered photograph you built up in your head.
That is exactly what happens to Gatsby. He has applied a massive 5-year romantic filter to his memory of Daisy. When he finally gets her back, when they are finally reunited, the immense tragedy is that the real Daisy simply cannot support the weight of his massive dream.
She is just a person, and frankly not a very strong or loyal person.
The reality is destined to shatter the illusion. The dream was doomed not because Daisy is terrible, but because the dream was impossibly huge to begin with.
And speaking of things shattering, we need to talk about the climax of the novel. We need to explain how this beautiful illusion violently collapses into what the critics call the smashed-up world.
Yes, the ending.
The ending of this book is not a quiet fade to black. It is a violent collision. Let's walk through how it all crashes down.
The ending occurs with brutal, rapid speed. It all happens on the hottest day of the summer. The tension is boiled over in a hotel room in the city where Tom exposes Gatsby as a common criminal and a bootlegger in front of Daisy.
And Daisy's illusion of Gatsby is completely shattered.
She is terrified. To calm her down, Gatsby lets Daisy drive his car, the flashy, yellow, custom-built car, back out to Long Island. Gatsby is sitting in the passenger seat. Daisy is driving erratically. She is emotionally distressed and driving very fast.
And as they pass through this bleak industrial area known as the Valley of Ashes, a woman runs out into the middle of the road.
And this isn't just any woman. This is Myrtle Wilson. And crucially, Myrtle is Tom Buchanan's secret mistress.
So why does she run out?
She runs out because she thinks Tom is driving the yellow car, since Tom had been driving it earlier in the day.
A fatal mistake. What happens?
Daisy, driving at high speed, strikes Myrtle. It is a horrific, violent impact. Myrtle is killed instantly. But Daisy does not stop. She panics, hits the gas, and keeps driving, fleeing the scene of the crime.
And what is Gatsby's reaction? He is in the car. He knows Daisy just killed a woman.
Gatsby, still desperately clinging to his heroic, perfect, platonic idea of himself as the ultimate romantic protector, decides he will take the blame.
He protects her.
He tells Nick that if anyone asks, he will say he was driving the car. He does it to protect Daisy, fully believing that this noble sacrifice will finally win her loyalty.
But this noble lie has fatal, devastating consequences.
It does. Myrtle's husband is a poor, desperate mechanic named George Wilson. He is grieving, and he wants revenge.
And Tom Buchanan gets involved again.
Tom Buchanan deliberately points George Wilson toward Gatsby. George assumes that the owner of the yellow car was not only the man who ran over his wife, but also the man who was sleeping with her.
So George Wilson walks to Gatsby's massive estate.
Yes. He finds Gatsby floating quietly in his luxurious swimming pool, waiting for a phone call from Daisy that is never going to come. George shoots and kills Gatsby and then turns the gun on himself.
It is an absolute catastrophe. 3 people are dead: the working-class mechanic, the working-class mistress, and the new money bootlegger. The bodies are piling up.
It's a complete mess.
And in the aftermath of all this blood and destruction, what do the old money aristocrats do? Do Tom and Daisy confess to the police? Does Daisy admit she was driving? Do they even attend Gatsby's funeral to pay their respects?
No, they do absolutely nothing. They simply pack their very expensive bags and they leave town. They run away to Europe or wherever else their money can hide them. They completely abandon the wreckage they created.
Which leads us to the moral thesis of the novel. It is one of the most powerful, important, and damning quotes in all of literature. Expert, give us a synthesis on this final judgment.
Nick Carraway, acting as our lightning rod, finally renders his ultimate judgment on the old money class. He sums up their behavior with a devastating paragraph.
What does he say?
He says, and this is a direct quote, "They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was. They kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made."
Retreated back into their money. What a cold, crushing sequence of words.
It is the ultimate indictment. If we connect this to the broader historical context, to Fitzgerald's view of America in the 1920s, this quote is everything.
Because he saw what was happening to society.
Fitzgerald looked around at the Jazz Age and he saw a society utterly obsessed with wealth, throwing wild parties, abandoning morality, and driving incredibly fast toward a cliff.
He saw a society completely careless about who got hurt along the way, as long as the champagne kept flowing.
Exactly. Tom and Daisy used their immense wealth not to do good, but as a shield. Their money isolates them from the consequences of their own destructive actions.
It's so unfair.
They can smash up lives. They literally smash up a human body with their car, and their bank accounts allow them to simply walk away without a scratch, leaving the poor and the dreamers to die and clean up the blood.
The physical car crash isn't just a plot device. The critics point out that it is a profound metaphor for the moral crash of American society.
Right.
And it is incredibly prophetic, considering the entire economy of the country would crash into the Great Depression just a few years after this book was published. Fitzgerald saw the cliff before anyone else did.
He saw that a society built purely on the pursuit of money, without moral responsibility, is destined to smash itself to pieces.
Wow. The layers in this text are just endless. We have covered an incredible amount of ground on this deep dive.
We really have.
We are moving into our final thoughts now, and I want to briefly summarize this journey for our listener to make sure all these complex threads are tied together.
It is vital to see how all these pieces, the biography, the craft, the themes, lock together to form a single picture.
So we started by looking at Fitzgerald's own rags-to-riches reality. We saw how a middle-class kid from the Midwest was shocked by the wealth of Princeton, got his heart broken by the rich Southern belle Zelda because he was too poor, and had to write a hit novel, This Side of Paradise, just to buy his way into her world.
We then examined the golden trap of his career. We discussed the stunning financial reality being paid the equivalent of $41,000 today for commercial short stories, yet living in a constant state of agonizing debt.
Right. We explored his desperate letters to Maxwell Perkins and how he sacrificed his true artistic ambitions by writing hack work just to keep up the glamorous illusion.
We broke down the mechanics of the Great Gatsby. We followed Jimmy Gats's criminal reinvention into Jay Gatsby. We unpacked the dark corruption of the American dream and explored the brutal, unbreakable barrier between the flashy, desperate new money of Gatsby's circus wagon car and the arrogant, entrenched old money of Tom and Daisy, whose voices are full of money.
We also uncovered the magician's secrets, revealing the grueling, hard-working craft behind his prose. We analyzed his famous composite style, dissecting how he brilliantly blended poetic beauty like yellow cocktail music with the harsh, ugly reality of human behavior.
And we explored how Nick Carraway functions as the essential lightning rod narrator, allowing Fitzgerald to critique society without preaching.
Finally, we navigated the deep philosophical waters of time and illusion. We explained Gatsby's platonic conception, his fatal mistake of falling in love with a perfect, filtered dream rather than a real woman.
And we stood in the wreckage of the smashed-up world, where the careless rich retreat safely behind their walls of money, letting the dreamers die for their mistakes.
It is a remarkable, perfectly unified piece of art that reflects an incredibly turbulent, divided life.
It truly is.
And I want to leave you, our listener, with a final, provocative thought to mull over. This comes directly from the biographical sources regarding the end of his life, and it presents a fascinating paradox.
It is a historical footnote that changes how you view everything he wrote.
Late in his life, long after the parties of the 1920s had ended, his health was failing, he was largely forgotten by the public, and his marriage to Zelda had tragically deteriorated as she struggled with severe mental illness.
It was a very dark period for him.
During this time, Fitzgerald wrote a very bitter, introspective letter to his daughter, Scotty. In that letter, he referred to himself as a man divided, and shockingly, he openly blamed Zelda.
He wrote that Zelda's insatiable desire for a luxurious lifestyle forced him to constantly work for money, rather than allowing him the time and peace to work for his dream of creating pure, high art.
He essentially blamed his pursuit of her and her wealth for destroying his potential.
He fundamentally believes that the need for money ruined his artistic soul.
But I want you to think about this contradiction. Imagine, for a moment, a completely different timeline.
Okay.
What if Fitzgerald had never met the glamorous Zelda Sayre? What if she had never rejected him for being a poor soldier? What if he had never felt that painful, desperate, burning hunger to be accepted by high society?
That's an interesting thought experiment.
If he had just lived a quiet, peaceful, secure middle-class life, would he have ever understood the dark side of the American dream well enough to write The Great Gatsby?
It is the ultimate paradox. The very pain he complained about was his actual subject matter.
Exactly. Was the very thing that destroyed his life, the crushing debt, the frantic greed, the romantic heartbreak, the desperate clawing need to belong to an elite class, was that also the exact required ingredient he needed to create his masterpiece?
Could The Great Gatsby only have been written by a man who was simultaneously being destroyed by the exact things he was writing about?
It is as if the disease and the cure were the exact same thing. He had to be burned by the fire in order to perfectly describe the flame. We will leave you to ponder that contradiction. Keep questioning the illusions around you and keep reading.